The 2026 Sidereal Astrology Guide is now available for pre-order, the printed and bound version, and you can download the PDF at any time. But if you pre-order printed and bound, you get the PDF and you get the 2 iCals which brings the moon transits and planetary transits into your phone or your computer's calendar, all the dates and times of those things. Like you would know the exact date and time of this this full moon lunar eclipse in Sidereal Aquarius. Hi, it's Dayna, and I'm here with your divination for the full moon lunar eclipse in Sidereal Aquarius. The 2025 Sidereal Astrology Guide says, clearly seeing internalized projections. Break down. If you can't hold it, let it hold you. Let it carry you. When you've done all that you know to do. Okay, it's officially eclipse season, y'all. It is officially that time of the year where things have a little bit more weight than usual. This is actually one of the really important principles of Divination for Liberation Sidereal Astrology. And that is the timing of things is much more important than the sign of things, right? That as we are keeping a timeline and tracking the astrology, when something happens is much more important than what happens. Because when something happens, particularly like right now, something happening during eclipse season, we can automatically extrapolate from that it is connected to a larger story, a bigger picture, and a more long-term narrative and set of circumstances in our lives. And so my job as the People's Oracle, creator of Divination for Liberation Sidereal Astrology, you heard, is to help you to keep track of this timeline. That's why in this podcast we talk about there's a time and season for all things. And when we pay attention to the patterns of the planets and the cycles of the planets, we can kind of understand what time it is and the significance of particular things. The language of Div for Lib and the signs really helps us to understand what to pay attention to. So we are in a season of transition between 2 eclipse series. We are wrapping up the Sidereal Pisces and Virgo eclipses that began October 2023, where we are reorganizing our personal and collective hierarchies of trust, where we are changing our belief systems. So many of the divinations, if not all of the divinations we've done on this podcast during the Virgo and Pisces eclipses have been reiterating this theme of releasing old assumptions and how our beliefs and assumptions are the thing that are really in the way of change in this season, that our beliefs and assumptions are forming and shaping what actions we even believe will be effective, what choices and options we perceive to be available to us. Those things are related to our assumptions and our beliefs. One of the ways that I've been talking about this transition, though, of eclipses in Pisces, Virgo to eclipses in Aquarius, Leo, where we are now, is that I call it the mutable crossover episode. Mutable is about trust, self-trust, hierarchies of trust. It is about how do you know what you know. It is about what faculties do you prioritize as the primary means of making sense. It is about certainty. It is about knowledge. It is about facts. And then we cross over to fixed. While Saturn's still immutable in sidereal Pisces until February 2028, and now we're talking about identity. We are talking about how do I know what I know? How do I know who I am? And what are the inputs that I rely on as meaningful and reliable sources of identity, self-knowledge, and self-image. At this particular full moon lunar eclipse in sidereal Aquarius, we are clearly seeing internalized projections. I finished up the 2026 Sidereal Astrology Guide for those of you who don't know, and it is now available for pre-order through Sunday, September 7th. I might extend it a day because this podcast is coming out late, but
In the 2026 guide, I talk a lot about how we come to know who we are. I even talked about this in the previous podcast episode, which was a new moon in Sidereal Leo. And I talked about how many of us are told who we are before we have an opportunity to know who we are for ourselves. If you look in the 2026 guide, you'll see on the Aquarius page that the ideal is to know myself for myself. So many of us have had that process disrupted by our caregivers, societies, insistent upon telling us who we are before we have an opportunity to even know who we are. And I think so much of the growth and healing work that we delve into as adults, so much of the reparenting work we do as adults has to do with making these distinctions between the self we've been told we are and the self we come to know ourselves to be. One of the things that Aquarius gives us the inclination and the work to do is to say that you can see yourself and know yourself in a very particular way that other people are not participating in and witnessing, and that still be true about you. Leo struggles because Leo does not have that truth and experience. Leo's experience is that if I am the only one seeing it, then it must not be real. And so I need to make sure that everybody sees this. If I'm the only one that knows that I am this person or perceives myself to be this person, then that is not necessarily a trustworthy or factual or even sane way to see myself. I need to make sure that everybody else is also seeing me this way. When we come through this eclipse series in Aquarius and Leo, which is about whose vision determines what you see, right? Whose vision is determining what you see when you look at yourself, when you perceive yourself. What are the narratives and stories and impressions and things that have been reinforced as, no, this is who you really are? And how is this eclipse series, which pretty much is all full moon lunar eclipse? That's kind of rare. So it's kind of weird because the Pisces Virgo eclipses all together will have had three new moons. I'm sorry, yeah, three new moon solar eclipses in sidereal Virgo. This particular series in Aquarius and Leo, all except one are full moon lunar eclipses. So we'll be straddling the axis of both of these signs, with the exception of a new moon eclipse in Aquarius, which is in February or March of 2026. So it's important to understand the balance that, yes, the human need for validation, our basic need to feel sane, comes from having a witness. I've talked about this before, but I am thoroughly convinced that what we call depression is a symptom of being ignored. Depression is a myopic focus on ourselves and our emotions as a communal calling for a witness. And that we find ourselves depressed when we have been deprived of a witness, when we are having an experience of ourselves, of our emotions, of reality that is alienating us, that is putting us outside of the accepted consensual definitions of reality, when we are having an emotional experience that does not align with the group, that is out of sync with the family. And this often happens because we're having experiences that other people aren't having with us, or they're having the experience with us, but they are not interpreting it the same way, or it's not having the same emotional impact, or they are consciously or unconsciously choosing to disassociate from the impact that it's having on them. I think in this season and this moment in time where there is increasing deprivation and destitution in all forms at the hands of the American empire, where we are living in increasing fabrications of scarcity and not having enough, when we are living in a society that has become the projection screen for one man's ego and self-image, who happens to be Leo, rising in Mars and Leo, right? With a very prominently placed sun. This is when depression skyrockets. Because who is the leader? Who is the entity, the sense maker, the expert that makes sense of things in a way that validates our experience? We are collectively living in a time of invalidation where your experience is not real. Who is our collective witness as a people right now? Who is our collective witness? This is the job of a parent. This is the job of a leader. This is the job of a president. This is the job of the adults in the room, to be a witness to the experiences of those who they are charged to lead, care for, or be responsible for. In absence of that witness, what does depression look like for us as a collective? Right? What does depression look like for you right now? In what ways do you need a witness? The awful, contradiction of this is that because depression as a symptom of being ignored manifest in this increasingly myopic focus on ourselves rather than our friends, our family, our community, and our society seeing that as a symptom and an invitation deeper into our subjective experience as a way to get us out, right? Having a witness is literally to have somebody else's light come and shine on your experience so that you can know that you're not the only one seeing it. Because when you feel like you're the only one seeing it, what does that make y'all? It makes you feel crazy. Right. So instead of seeing depression as an invitation to witness the suffering, to witness and bear witness to the experience of those who struggle, it further alienates us and it further becomes something that makes us even more depressed. It becomes another symptom that needs to be quenched with drugs, with alcohol, with shopping, with whatever way that we can numb ourselves or dissociate from this reality that we don't have a witness in our experience with. This is what I call the relational work of sanity making. I've talked about it on this podcast before, and I've talked about it elsewhere. The relational work of sanity making says, I have the power to make you sane or insane by offering you a witness or depriving you of a witness. Depression is something that we are doing to each other. Depression is something that happens to us when we are deprived of a witness. Clearly seeing internalized projections is an opportunity for us to lean into these moments where we are discerning and discriminating between the self we've been told we are and the self we know ourselves to be in this moment. And seeing our own discomfort with those discrepancies as an invitation to authenticity. I wrote this for Leo in some horoscopes for 2026. It's on my Instagram page at People's Oracle. And I asked this question that was basic, or no, I offered up this definition of authenticity that was basically like authenticity is not about how real you are and how you show yourself. Authenticity is about the willingness to accept all the parts of you, even those you anticipate will be judged harshly by other people. Humiliation, shame, and embarrassment are incredibly powerful things. Humiliation is the wound of sidereal Leo. It's the catalyst experience that kind of happens over and over again that makes them into this person who cannot bear to function without a witness. This is where we get kind of some of these themes of sidereal Leo oversharing, because sidereal Leo is kind of tied into this need for a witness in a way that they struggle to function without it. And so humiliation is in part the experience of having the spotlight shown on you in like a startling way without your consent. And that spotlight is kind of this way that your caregivers or other adults or people who have power over your authority over you draw attention to some aspect of you in a way that makes it the defining feature of you. Humiliation is a word I'm using in absence of a word with more nuance, but it's to be in the spotlight. And this is part of the experience of being told who you are before you have an opportunity to know who you are. It's like everybody sees this when they look at you. Everybody thinks of you this way when they look at you. This is the perception that people have of you. And the experiences of humiliation are such that Leo becomes preoccupied with trying to anticipate or predict, project onto the actions, behaviors of other people that very thing that they've been told they are. Right. So if everybody says, "Oh, you're so smart. You're the smartest kid. I've never met anybody smarter than you. Wow, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to be a lawyer." Right. And it's praise. This is good, right? It's good to be praised, but it's also like, and I've seen so many coaching and divination clients, especially Black women who struggle with this, that they get through their PhD, they get to the completion of their dissertation and they're ready to defend their dissertation. And they're like, oh my God, what's next? It's like, well, you can't go to school anymore. The self image of the smart kid who's achieving and constantly moving in the direction of those things because it gives you a constant witness. And it's just like, when will you be convinced that that is a part of who you are? It does not have to be the whole of who you are. And it's often a time where they are being pushed into self discovery. I don't want to get too deep. I don't want to get too deep, but there is a way that being a perpetual student kind of keeps us in this childlike posture of like waiting for the teacher to pat you on the head, right? Like if the PhD and the dissertation is not enough of a witness and external evidence of who you are that other people can validate, what will be? And I think this is a question that applies broadly for everyone at this full moon lunar eclipse in Sidereal Aquarius, where we are clearly seeing internalized projections. A projection is a way of our consciousness and our psyche seeing something. My grandmother, when she's always been into cameras, like she was always into cameras, and my grandmother took pictures all the time. She was not like an artist in the sense of like composing these great shots. It was more so like candid, just wanting to have a record in memory. And when she passed away, it was just like hundreds, if not thousands, of photos from the 30s, 40s, all the way until she passed in the very early 90s. And one part of her photo collection were these cases of slides, right? And with these slides, you can look at them, but they're not meant to be looked at just with your naked eye. You had to have a projection machine and a screen in order to see the slide, right? So you put the little slide in the little rotating machine, turn off the lights, and the machine will illuminate, magnify, and project the image of that slide onto the wall. This is how our self image, psyche, and consciousness works. I can't perceive myself directly, right? I am perceiving myself through the reflections around me, through the reactions and behavior and treatment and statements and words of the people around me. My self image, my capacity to experience myself comes through how other people experience me. And so a projection is to say that everyone is reflecting back a particular aspect of myself to me, which also means I become a projection screen for other people's self image. And I become a projection screen as the way for other people to experience and get to know themselves. Another way to understand this is with Donald Trump. He is a person who is stuck in this particular developmental phase where he perceives himself to be the cause of everything. That is very appropriate, like the first 6 years of life, to not have distinctions between yourself and your environment and yourself and other people. And when you become an adult who never develops that distinction between yourself and the environment and yourself and other people, that's what we call narcissism. So, narcissism, there's narcissistic behavior, but like narcissism itself is about like psychically in your mind, your psyche cannot make distinctions between yourself and your environment, such that everybody becomes a projection screen. Everything everybody says and does is about you. Everything that happens is because of you, right? You know how little kids are, they'll think that they're making something happen, like when you drive in the car and you see the water droplets on the thing and you think you're making the water droplets go because you're blowing. It's like, no, that's not what happens. Right. But if you're an adult who's still doing that, that's when we get narcissism. Right. So clearly seeing internalized projections is in one way about us collectively reclaiming our right to self-determination. That is the gift of Sidereal Aquarius. Self-determination is to know yourself for yourself. It is to put off other people's projections. Both Leo and Aquarius play a role in projecting our self image, right? Leo protects our ego and sense of self by making sure that we assert ourselves, that we rightly discern when to take things personally, when to correct people. Leo protects us from humiliation and embarrassment by making sure that we magnify and shine a light on the parts of us that we want people to see and leave in the shadows or out of view the parts of us that we don't want to see. It's about being respected. It's about dignity, right? It's about being taken seriously. If our dignity was respected as children, we were not chastised in public. Embarrassing things weren't repeated to other adults while we were there. We were defended when adults disrespected us or talked to us crazy. Our parents apologized when they talked to us crazy. Our caregivers respected us and allowed our experience of them to change how they see and know themselves, right? We were allowed to be agents of influence that take up space, where the people around us changed their behavior because of us. And most importantly, they came to know themselves in new and different ways because they allowed us to show and tell them things about ourselves. That's what happens when your dignity is respected as a child, when that need is met. When your self determination is respected as a child, you are given privacy, meaning your caregivers are not compelled to tell you everything that they think about you. You are asked what you think about yourself. You are asked what you want to be called. You are asked what your gender is. You are asked how you want to express aspects of yourself rather than being told what your gender is, rather than being told how you need to behave and act so that you won't be embarrassed or that you won't embarrass your caregivers or your family and loved ones. Most of us did not get those needs met, which is why in this time and season where we're having eclipses in Sidereal, Aquarius, and Leo, it is a time that we are collectively doing the work of self determination. We are individually doing the work of self determination. We are collectively doing the work of deeper authenticity, which is to accept all parts of ourselves without shame or embarrassment. It is knowing that, hey, it's okay for this thing to be true about you. You don't have to tell everybody. And also, you don't have to make the assumption that everybody sees and knows it. Let's take a pause here, and when I come back, I'll pull some cards. All right. We are back with the tarot to offer us insight and guidance as we move through this new moon, full moon, lunar eclipse in Sidereal Aquarius. So we've got the moon on the bottom, and the moon has a couple of different significations for me. The moon is a card of being in the dark. It's a card of not knowing. It is a card where we are deprived of the light as a way of seeing things. It can be dark, but it can also be fully illuminated. And it would be a way for us to finally see something. Because this is a lunar eclipse at a full moon, I'm more inclined to use the last or the latter interpretation, which is to say that when the moon's face is fully illuminated, the moon is the ultimate projection screen, right? You cannot perceive the light of the sun directly. You perceive and experience the light of the sun because of everything it illuminates around you. And you understand the nature of that light by the way that it illuminates things. This is why the sun represents the self image, not the self, not your real self, not your authentic self, not the real you. The sun is your self image. It is an internalized aggregations of projections. It is how you want others to perceive you and what embarrasses you. If you need to hear all about the sun in Sidereal, there is in the last podcast episode, I did sun sign interpretations in Sidereal, and you can find that bonus content on the Div for Lib Podia. I will post a link or share a link to that in the description of this video. We've got the seven, of swords, and we've got the page of pentacles. Let's start with the page of pentacles. Pages are map makers. Pages are data collectors. They are very mercurial in the sense that they are not coming with preformed assumptions or experiences. They are mapping out and analyzing and asking questions and inquiring and observing. With the Page of Pentacles, we are counting our ducats. We're counting our coins and our money. We are calculating how much time something is going to take. We are measuring the amount of things. We're putting it in a spreadsheet. I feel like this is kind of indicative of where Mars is right now. Mars is still in Virgo, and Virgo is the analyzer. It calculates meticulously. It is using the external senses to discern what something is based on its measurable qualities, right? That is the Page of Pentacles or the Page of Discs in this um, tarot deck. Then we have the Seven of Swords. I read this card quite differently than other people. This card has not yet come up for me to indicate lying or sneakiness or thieves or backhandedness. The Seven of Swords in my tarot lexicon and experience is about problem solving. It is about learning how to use tools adeptly. It is about, it's often come up for me when I have to fix something or figure something out of a technical nature. And the Seven of Swords is often a sign that, yeah, you'll be able to figure this out. It's the card of tinkering. And so tinkering is seeing how something works. It is looking at the pieces, taking it apart, and putting it back together. This is quite an interesting combination of cards, and I think a departure from the cards that have been showing up for us. I do think that the Page of Pentacles showed up for us in one reading earlier this year, but I can't say I've pulled the Seven of Swords or the Moon on this podcast before. So I think there's a lot in this card about this full moon eclipse being an opportunity for us to dissect that which we call ourself and to break it down into component pieces. If I were to give you homework based on these cards, I would tell you to think back through every year of your life and to make an accounting of who you were at that time and what were the messages you received that validated or undermined your perception of yourself. And you come to the present, or maybe you work backwards from where you are now and figure out, how did you arrive at the conclusion as to what your gender is? How did you arrive to the conclusion as to what your race is? How did you arrive to the conclusion as to what your class and sexual identity are? And how can this moment be representative of an opportunity for you to make an accounting, right? The Page of Pentacles is trying to make sure that things add up. Is the self that you identify with now with regard to your race, your gender, your class, your sexual identity, your professional identity, your family role, your role in your friendships and your relationships, your marriage or your romantic partnership, your role in your community, your identity spiritually in your religious community? Now is the time to take an accounting, because clearly seeing internalized projections really comes from like this baseline assumption that all of the things that you identify as yourself may not actually be yourself. And the only way to find out at this moment, I think, is the cards are saying we have to make an accounting. We have to take an accounting and see if things add up. So much of this is rooted in our sense of self worth, our pride, our confidence, and our ability to feel sane. We take the leftover projections that feel like us and we form a new self with them, and we carry that forward when we get to our Leo full moon eclipse in the early spring, late winter. and that becomes the identity that we project. Understand that we need all of these cycles because nothing is fixed or rigid. And it's often when we fight these cycles of time and these seasons and we try to calcify and concretize this self that we become destructive to ourself and others. When we are unable to clearly see internalized projections and take these moments to account for what feels authentic to us in this moment, we become a danger to ourselves and others because we do not allow others to show up as their authentic self. They merely become a projection screen for the self we feel sometimes aggressively inclined to assert and project. And then we become the projection screen for people who cannot withstand the difficult work of self determination, which is to know yourself for yourself and to be able to maintain that image and that concept of yourself without a witness. It's all about balance. You need a witness, but if you have a witness all the time, you can never really know yourself. And if you never have a witness, that's another problem. You won't know how you look to other people, and that can make you just a little, you be out here not knowing how you look. And it's a lot of people not knowing how they look out here. I feel like this moment is so important for us collectively, particularly because of the way that race, gender, and class, and even sexual identity are hierarchied in our society, that there are some people who manage to go throughout their whole life not really knowing how they look to other people. And then there are other people who, from the moment they are born, from the moment they kind of become aware of themselves as a social being, they do not have the privilege or the safety or capacity to um, move through life without knowing how they look, right? Like self consciousness is a consequence of constantly being told who you are, constantly being told what you look like. And when people, which can also be self awareness, though I make a distinction between those two things in Differ Live, that self consciousness is the process by which we become conscious of ourself, and self awareness is that capacity to make distinctions between what's me and what's you. And so people who lack self awareness, people who do not make distinctions between themselves and others, it's kind of what part of what we would call privilege in this society, right? As a woman, I have to be aware of what I look like to everybody all the time because people's willingness to speak to me and be kind to me is predicated on me knowing how I look and looking a certain way. My safety and the ways that it is within my power to not make myself a target of male violence requires that I know how I look to men. But also, when I want to benefit from proximity to men, I have to know how I look to men. And so in our society, white people, especially white men, men in general, they get to walk around not knowing how they look. They get to walk around and not be aware of themselves because no one is constantly reminding them and telling them who they are in the same way that women do, particularly white men. The violence that we are experiencing in this moment is because whiteness is inherently narcissistic. Whiteness inherently perceives what someone else has or doesn't have, what another group can or cannot do. Whiteness perceives it to be a statement about their own worth and value. Last night, I was just watching the PBS special on the 1819 Wilmington, North Carolina coup, where they were very explicitly calling themselves white supremacist, and that North Carolina and Wilmington, North Carolina needed to be a white supremacist state. And for some reason, the narcissism of whiteness felt threatened by a majority Black town with a thriving middle class, with white and Black people who were living in integrated neighborhoods, serving integrated in the political offices, doing business with each other, right? This is not to say that it was all kumbaya, but whiteness is inherently narcissistic in the sense that it does not have an awareness of itself separate from other people. Everything in the vicinity of whiteness, every person, every group, the earth, the trees, the sky, the water is a projection screen for whiteness. And the violence that we're experiencing in this moment is because really for the past, since Reconstruction, since Civil War, honestly, right? But definitely since Obama's presidency, which began in 2008, we have been holding up a mirror to whiteness and we have been reclaiming our identities. Black Lives Matter is a phrase of self-determination. It is to say that whiteness perceives Blackness to be this thing. Whiteness perceives transness to be this thing. And self-determination says, I don't need whiteness to witness me in order for this thing about me to be true. And so the ego and narcissism of whiteness is reacting violently to this reality that, like, no, as a Black woman, as the diaspora of Black people, like, who I am and how I show up is not about you. My basic human right to have housing and healthcare, it is not about you, white people. The cult of MAGA is all about the narcissism of whiteness perceiving everyone and everything outside of it as a satellite that can only preserve the image that it wants to have of itself. And their leader, the malignant narcissist of all malignant narcissists, right? So when we talk about divination for liberation, we are talking about the reclamation of our self-image also being the work of liberation. That when we come to Leo and Aquarius, I've talked about this before, historically, there have been major uprisings and turning points and violence from white people towards Black people in their efforts of self-determination when we have transits in Sidereal, Aquarius, and Leo. The Nat Turner rebellion, his sign from God that it was time to start the rebellion and the uprising was a full moon lunar eclipse in Aquarius, right? The marches on Selma, so many, if not all of the race riots, 1906 in Atlanta, Red Summer, the whole of 1965, right? This was all oppositions between Aquarius and Leo. And we can kind of mark this particular eclipse series as ways that marginalized groups that have been colonized, marginalized, enslaved, imprisoned, and oppressed by whiteness or whatever the colonizing entity is in your culture, because, Europeans ain't the only ones who colonized Japan. I'm looking at you. Right, China? Y'all had some bloody wars to get that big mass of land all under one leader, right? But Aquarius and Leo, I mean, there is a post on my blog archive, and I'll try to link it in the description. And in it, I talk about what Aquarius has represented historically for America, and I call it a self-determined nation. Even when we're talking about the Civil War, that was an Aquarius moment. Lincoln had an Aquarius stellium in his birth chart. And you can kind of look at the birth charts of a president as an indicator of what their tenure as president is going to be like and what America is going to be dealing with primarily at that time. Um, so another conversation for another day. Let's wrap this up. If you don't know, this is the Divination for Liberation podcast. I'm Dayna Lynn Nuckolls, and I'm so glad that you tuned in and listened today. We are at the peak of the current COVID surge. Thankful to the universe that in context, this is not a bad surge, but COVID levels are elevated, extremely so in California, Texas, Louisiana, all of the coastal states. For some reason, the Midwest and the Northeast aren't really getting the brunt of this wave. But I think that there will be another COVID surge, November, December, January. And that COVID surge will likely dominate in the Midwest and the Northeast, which is not really getting hit very hard right now. But California is bad right now, just all over the Bay Area, Northern California, and of course, Los Angeles, all very high. You can check my Instagram stories for a map on what COVID levels are. With that said, if you're feeling sick, it is very likely not a cold. It is very likely COVID, regardless of what your test might say. And, my screen went off. Regardless of what a test might say, and you need to treat whatever illness that you have as COVID. Mask up. It is not safe to be in indoor spaces without a mask because someone there likely has COVID right now, and you might have COVID with no symptoms, and you might be passing it along to someone who won't be as lucky as you. In the meantime, in between time, you all continue to take care of yourselves. I will be back in a couple of weeks for the new moon solar eclipse in Sidereal Virgo, the last in that series. I hope you'll tune in then. Y'all take care. Bye.